Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We still have a few people coming in. Welcome to our webinar this morning for Athlete Soul. We are joined here with Dyke. We're going to be talking about mindfulness this morning. I still have a few people joining us, so let's give it a few more minutes. Thank you, everybody, for staying muted. You're welcome to put your video on if you would like to share and participate. As we wait for a few more people to join us, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Miriam Glaise. I'm the founder of Athlete Soul. This is our Tuesday webinar. This event is being recorded. We'll share the recording with you afterwards, so you can redo it if you would like to. It will be available on our website as well. And you can also check out our website for more information on all the events that we're offering on Tuesday, our educational webinar, as well as our industry insight on Friday. And we also have some conversation for experts in the field of athlete development that you can check on our website. So it's athletesoul.space/events. I'm still having a few people joining, so we're going to take one more minute, and then I'll pass it on to Ford to introduce the webinar and take us through this hour with him. So, Ford, do you want to get started, and I'll let people in as we go, okay?
Sounds good to me, Miriam.
Thanks so much for being here. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. Just a quick thumbs up from the crew as long as you can hear me via audio. Perfect. All right. Awesome. Well, thanks again, Miriam, for hosting this webinar today. I really appreciate the opportunity to present with you all and share mindfulness-based performance health optimization. Hopefully you can see the screen that I have here. This is a platform that I've been working on since the start of my graduate studies at Auburn University back in 2012. And I'm still utilizing it through professorship, out in consulting platforms in different performance domains, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But my intention for the webinar itself is to be interactive. So with that being said, I would like everyone to remain on mute just for sound clarity purposes. But of course, if you're prompted otherwise, or if you have a question or comment, just come off mute and feel free to pose your question. I'll also notify you all, for those of you who do have your video on, to start and stop during some of our application-based portions of the webinar. So just please remain cognizant of those instructions. It's for everyone to be comfortable in their own space. And I will be the only one on video, as I'm sure Miriam will be as well. So we're gonna go ahead and jump right into it. And we're gonna start with what is known as the sit. And this is the standing, seated, or supine, meaning you are laying flat, introspective technique. So let's just take 1 minute here, and now's a good time to shut your camera off and just allow yourself to settle into the space that you're currently occupying. Whether you're outdoors, inside your home, at your place of occupation, wherever you are, just take a second to settle in and capture a good sense of the environment. And if you're comfortable in doing so, you can close your eyes or just let your gaze fall softly on the floor in front of you. And we're just simply going to rest here for 1 minute. And just bringing that awareness back into your space. and taking note of how you feel. And when you're ready, if you would like to, you can bring your video back on. So I think it's important to start the webinar. It's entitled Mindfulness-Based Performance and Health Optimization with a little bit of mindfulness. And that was just simply sitting quietly for a total of 60 seconds. And that 60 seconds for some people could feel like a very long time. And for others, it can feel like a rather short time. We're going to talk more and more about this as we move through the webinar today. But if we want to talk about mindfulness, we have to talk about the brain. If we want to be able to understand the psychological construct of mindfulness, we have to take just a minute here to understand the organ itself. So go ahead and take your hands, both hands, left and right hand, and bring it down into a fist with your thumbs to the outside, and bring those fists together. And just taking a look at that three-dimensional representation of your hands together, relatively speaking, that's the approximate size of your own brain. Now, for those of you who claim to have smaller hands, don't get worried. It's just for the purposes of a demonstration here. But we have two hemispheres in our brain. We have a left hemisphere and we have a right hemisphere. Now, in taking both of those hands again together, go ahead and open them up this way, as if you're getting ready to hold something. Now, when your hands are open in this manner, you could take your own brain and physically place it inside of your hands. So you can hold the organ. Now, the mind is the brain in action. So the question is, if we're able to hold the physical size and space of our organ, our brain, how do we hold our mind? Because we know that the mind is infinite. And with that being said, we also know that everyone is mindful to a certain degree. It's an inherent human capacity. And this is primarily due to the large frontal lobe we have as human beings, more specifically the prefrontal cortex. So we'll go ahead and take one more hand again, make it into that B shape, and then just place it across your forehead. Now, if you look down at your hand, that's a rather large section of what we call real estate. And more specifically here, what we're referring to is the prefrontal cortex real estate, the neuronal real estate that is associated with this area of the brain. And the reason it's so large is because it has a lot of responsibility. It has to make decisions. It has to plan for the past and the future events. It solves problems at a relatively high degree. It can make judgments, and it can reflect on the past and also the future. So with that being said, we know how important it is for our minds to be in a certain space to perform at a high level and also to have a cognitive well-being plan. But we also have to deal with our thoughts, right? So we have over 80,000 thoughts on average per day. And as humans, some of us may be more towards the 60,000 end or the 100,000 end. It's an average. But with that being said, we know that thoughts precede action. We don't perform anything first without a thought. Even something as habitual of, I have to brush my teeth every morning, every night, there's first a thought that happens before that behavioral output occurs. So the takeaway here is, if we change our thinking, we can ultimately change our life. And before we get into the multifaceted psychological construct of mindfulness, I'm interested in hearing from the audience. And I definitely want this to be an interactive platform. So feel free to come off the mute and just share with me your definition of mindfulness.
I'll go forward.
Good morning, Ned. Good afternoon, wherever you are. Morning. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just had a thought last night. I was about positive thinking, and I was thinking positive thinking is you're chasing the wind unless there's positive action. So what you just said a while ago about the brain, the mind is the brain in action. I like that. And so we were kind of thinking that same way last night. And but mindfulness from a pilot standpoint was situational awareness. And that was self-awareness, jet awareness, terrain awareness, altitude awareness, airspeed, fuel, weapons, whatever that was part of the mission. I mean, you had to know all this stuff and prioritize, and you had to know the relevant past applied to the current moment to facilitate the future that you wanted. So you had to create the future that you wanted and in the moment make it happen. And so you were actually executing ahead of that moment when you were in the moment. I know that's kind of deep, but
that's an incredible explanation. I appreciate that, Ned.
I'm doing mindfulness with you to the basics, I just focus on your breathing. It's training the brain to prioritize, because you've got all these thoughts coming in, which is the same thing as you're being in a fast moving jet with all these things happening. But you've got all these negative and things that you want to do in the afternoon and all that, but you've got to eliminate those and prioritize to the moment of what's important, and that's your breath. So you're training to that degree. So that's how I think.
Thank you. That was awesome. I appreciate that. Would anyone else like to provide their own definition of mindfulness?
I got a few things for you, Ford, a few thoughts for the group. I think mindfulness is kind of the beginning of mental health and some things that you can do for mental health overall. I think it's the start of awareness of everything that you can build with your mindfulness. Like Ned was saying, being able to kind of sort through the positive and negative and just being aware, to me, is the start of mindfulness. And then from being mindful, that's when you start to sharpen and build your mindset, your mental skills, or your mind skills. So that's kind of the approach that has been, kind of happening with me throughout my life.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that, Matt. I appreciate it.
What I was gonna say that for me, it's staying in the present moment and being able to be singularly focused in that moment without distraction. And I would keep it as simple as that.
Thank you, Miriam. I think the overall consensus from the group, at least, is awareness. And that is definitely a huge component of mindfulness. So before we get to awareness, we need to understand that mindfulness is an application-based practice. It's something that we are applying in our own daily lives, similar to what Ned and Matt mentioned. And it's a process-oriented approach. This isn't something that you have a result or a goal that you're trying to achieve. It's process. You're in the moment. You're paying attention to the step-by-step nature of these practices. And the idea here is we're trying to utilize these practices to first generate, and then the difficult and the challenging part becomes the sustainability of present moment awareness. That may seem easy. It's pretty simple to write this definition out, but this is a tall order for a lot of people. So hopefully today I can provide you with some tools and techniques to start your journey or continue your journey if you've already begun. So the important thing here is we're taking this awareness that we've generated and we've sustained through our practices, and what we're trying to do is direct our energetic state. Now, more often than not, people are really well known when it comes to fatigue. When you ask someone to raise their hand if they are familiar with cognitive fatigue, of course, their hand goes up. You feel that cloud on the front of the brain. You feel headaches, difficulty sleeping, the list goes on. People also are aware of what it feels like to be physically fatigued, whether it's after training, sitting too long, traveling too long, whatever it may be. The other side of that coin is the energetic state. Specifically, we're talking about the collective nature of cognitive, physical, and emotional energy. That is the energetic state. Please remember that as we move forward through this webinar. That's going to be very important. So I wanted to talk about two subcomponents of mindfulness, and that is trait versus state. Trait is the subcomponent that some individuals more than others, have a greater propensity to be mindful, whereas others do not. It's an inherent human capacity for us, as we mentioned earlier, because of our large frontal lobe. Now, this is really related to what is known as the general cognitive mode. And you can either be mindful, or on the other side, you can have mind wandering. And just in that 60 seconds in the outset of the webinar, and I asked you to close your eyes and just settle into your space, I guarantee you, for a lot of us, our minds were kind of going forwards and backwards. I forgot to feed the dog this morning. What's on my agenda for later? What am I going to have for dinner tonight? I can't believe I didn't send that email yesterday. Whatever it may be, we're constantly in this past and future, forward and backwards moment. So our general cognitive mode is related to the mindfulness or the mind wandering, whereas state is the other side. State is the here and now. This is where the actual practice of mindfulness itself comes into play. Practices such as meditation or mindful movement, yoga for some of you, and setting daily intentions, just to name a few. So the research suggests to us that the architecture of our brain circuitry will shift with a repeated experience. That could be when you listen to a song once versus you listen to it 100 times. When you shoot a basketball once versus you shoot that basketball 100 times. Whatever it may be, the way in which our brain shifts is because of repeated practice and repeated experience. And specifically, neuroscientists have observed these changes in both functional and structural areas of the brain. And this is going to be consistent with these application-based practices. So not to get into too much of a physiological discussion here, but I just want to give you guys some highlights, because I do think it's important that with repeated practice and consistent mindfulness-based practices, we see downregulation of the amygdala. The amygdala is a deep cortical area of the brain, which is the emotional center of the brain. So downregulation of the emotional center sounds like a bad thing. It sounds like we're trying to suppress everything, but it's actually the exact opposite. It means that we're more control of our emotions. We're able to step back and become the observer. We also see on our second part here, reduced activity in the default mode network, DMV for short, DMN for short, not the Department of Motor Vehicle Transportation. This is a region of the brain that is associated with mind wandering and cognitive rumination. On the other side of that coin, we see an increased activity in the task positive network. That's the TPN. This is our online attentional control. So we're in the moment. Our TPN network is on full reserve. Whereas directly otherwise, you see that the DMV network is unable to be online when task positive is online. So the more likely we practice these techniques, the more shifts we'll see, as indicated in some research on epigenetics. So there's an interaction here. You have a trait level of mindfulness, but you also have state mindfulness. And the more you practice your state, the more you can affect your trait. So in addition to these subcomponents of mindfulness, we also have what is known as the 5 facets of mindfulness: observation, description, awareness, non-judgment, and non-reactivity. And an important piece to mention here is these are not mutually exclusive, meaning they are interdependent. They work along with each other. So going back to that average of 80,000 thoughts per day, these facets are related oftentimes to the overall observation of the fact that there are that many thoughts per day. This isn't a question of we need to tally our 80,000 thoughts a day. It's just being able to be observe them. With that, you can also be able to describe your thoughts. That could be a challenge for some of us. The awareness aspect just comes from the overall awareness of this observation and of this description. And then most importantly, arguably, is the non-judgment and non-reactivity. The non-judgmental perspective for most people is a way to look at something without attaching any meaning to it. Same thing with the non-reactive nature of something, which we'll talk more about this in just a little bit. So the nice thing about these 5 facets is they are measurable. And as a consultant, I utilize this particular questionnaire here. It's a battery of 15 items, and it's known as the 5-facet mindfulness questionnaire. And I try to establish a baseline assessment of trait mindfulness with individuals before I incorporate any type of intervention or any type of training. So I just wanted to highlight some of these measurements for you so you get an idea as to what we're talking about when we're measuring these 5 facets. So within the observation construct, it says, I notice how foods and drinks often affect my thoughts, bodily sensations, and emotions. Description, I'm good at finding words to describe my feelings. Awareness, I find myself doing things without paying attention. Some of us may be relating to this by now. Non-judgment, I tell myself I shouldn't be feeling the way I'm feeling. And lastly here, non-reactivity. When I have a distressing thought or images, I just notice them and let them go. So these 5 facets play a large role in the overall global mindfulness score, which is indicative of our level of trait mindfulness. And remember, the key here is that this can all be altered by consistent practice. So as a human, you're a performer, right? It doesn't matter which performance realm you're a part of or performance domain you reside in. As a human, you are a performer. So as the title of this webinar indicates, mindfulness-based performance and health optimization. We're going to integrate mindfulness and performance here. And this can be done by showcasing the relationship of performance and remember that energetic state, which is comprised of cognitive, physical, and emotional energy. So on the y-axis, this vertical axis, we have the level of performance from our rock bottom low to our utmost highest level of performance. And on the x-axis, our horizontal axis, we have the energetic state. Again, from our lowest level of energetic state all the way to our maxed out highest level of energetic state. And most people think that this is actually a positive relationship that exists as a function of performance over the energetic state, but that's simply incorrect. Others think that this is a negative relationship. And again, that is incorrect as well. Really what we're seeing here is an inverted U. In this particular relationship, at the lowest level of energetic state, we see our lowest level of performance. And stated otherwise, at our highest level of energetic state, we also see our lowest level of performance. So there's a specific area under the curve, and this area is referred to as ideal performance state, IPS for short. You're going to hear me refer to this quite a bit as we move forward. This is also known as flow or flow state. And some of us, I think, have hopefully related to flow state. Ned was alluding into it earlier in the cockpit of an F-16. This is where we have that effortless focus and concentration. The energetic state is running super efficiently. We're highly effective in our performance domain. And this is where the greatest amount of productivity occurs. This is really when all of our cylinders are firing in synchronicity. But sometimes people report a change in the perception of time, which is pretty interesting. So an explanation here is, let's say you're engaged in a 4-hour activity and it seems like it was only 45 minutes long. On the other side of that, you're engaged in a 45-minute activity and it feels like 4 hours have already passed. That would be by definition not in flow state. Flow state also maximizes the ability to respond appropriately. So between stimulus and response, there is always a certain amount of space. So if I clap my hands and you're visually watching me clap my hand, there is then a stimulus, and now there is time for our auditory cortex to process this information according to, depending on how fast your internet connection is, because we are on a webinar platform. Before you process that as a hand clap, there's a space between there. And the space is often wider in flow state, and this which allows us for a greater amount of information to be processed accordingly, which can be a really, really good thing when it comes to optimal performance. But as we showed earlier, balance is key. That area under the curve, IPS, was not to say dead center, but it was in general right in the middle of the energetic state, not too low, not too high. So if balance is key, then the question is, how do we obtain balance? And this is where it gets a little bit more interesting, I think, because balance isn't something that you just go and find. You can't download an app or go to your neighborhood market and buy 6 ounces of balance. It doesn't really work that way. It's something that we have to create and cultivate. So with that being said, this is the transition point of where I will showcase the pillars of health for you all. And these pillars of health, I believe, are the primary foundation for cultivating balance. In this particular order, it starts with hydration, moves into nutrition, movement, and recovery. The most basic form of negative stress we experience as human beings is not having our physiological needs met properly. And while each of these pillars is a 45-minute, 60-minute, 90-minute seminar, workshop, webinar, what have you, in consideration of time today, we're going to discuss the most immediately accessible, highly effective, and free remedy associated with performance and health optimization. So the idea here is we're trying to cultivate our balance in order to generate flow. But before we get into that highly effective, immediately accessible, and free remedy, I just want to share a bit of a perspective with you all, because I do think it's an interesting time, of course. Now more than ever, people are reaching out, asking and inquiring about different training regimens and nutritional plans and hydration protocols. But with that, I just want you to take this into consideration. You can sit and be sedentary for 3 months. And not that I recommend any of you do this as a kinesiologist, of course, but you'll be fine. You'll make it out. You may have some low back pain, some tightness in your hip flexors. The list goes on, but you'll be just fine. 3 weeks, it's, again, not that I recommend you do this, but we can survive 3 weeks without any food. We'll be in full destarvation mode. However, you'll make it out. You'll need to come back online with some supplementations, but you'll be just fine. And 3 days without any water, full dehydration, you'll need intravenous IV, but again, you'll make it out. But really the highlight here is in as little as 3 minutes, we're in trouble. We're in trouble without our next inhale. In fact, wherever you are right now, don't change your bodily position. Just exhale everything you have in your lungs. Just everything out, completely deplete the lung, and don't take another inhale for 30 seconds. And we're rolling up on 5 seconds here. Coming into 15. Rounding out 20. 25, and you're starting to see the point. Go ahead and please take a deep inhale. So more often than not, humans attend to pieces of the puzzle without focusing on the main border, so to speak. And that border is respiration. Now, the nice thing about respiration cycles is we have full control of them. Even though it happens at a subconscious automatic entity, we still have full control. Right now, you can take full control of your inhalation and your exhalation. And these respiration cycles occur on average of 23,000 times a day. That is 23,000 chances to practice present moment awareness throughout the day. However, oftentimes we see that suboptimal respiration occurs in a lot of individuals. And more often than not, that is because of poor posture and poor biomechanics. So without changing anything, again, where you are, don't change your positioning, just simply exactly where you are, close your eyes, and just simply take note of your respiration cycles. Pay close attention to the inhalation and exhalation. And take note as to whether those inhalations are shallow or deep, short or long, fast or slow. And same thing with the exhalation. And you're just simply observing what your respiration cycle is without any judgment. You're not reacting. You're not trying to change anything. Just noticing what's occurring here. Very good. So as mentioned, respiration is a critical component in the pillars of health. I purposefully leave it out of the initial slide because more often than not, we don't really think of it, as I mentioned before, but it is one of the most highly accessible, immediately effective, and free remedies we have as human beings. The nice thing about respiration is as we take a very slow, deep breath through our nose and pause at the top, we stimulate the vagus nerve. And with that stimulation, we see reductions in heart rate, and we see an overall sense of calm, and we see flushing of cortisol, stress hormones. So this is a great technique to utilize when it comes to health and wellness, but also performance optimization. So let's talk a little bit about deep, purposeful breathing and some of the benefits of optimal respiration. First and foremost, we see that we have a reoxygenation of our bloodstream. which is very important. That's one of our primary fuels for our system. We also see detoxification of our cellular resources. Of note here, we are comprised of trillions, that's what the T, trillions of cells. So each time you take that deep inhale, you're essentially attending to trillions of cellular functioning in your body. And a nice note here with digestion facilitation, I know there's some athletes on the call today. If you watch an athlete in any type of meal, it's usually a pretty quick event. And with that, they're not getting the most optimal nutritional exposure from that diet. So what we like to do is implement some deep breathing here to facilitate digestion in order for their gastrointestinal system to run optimally as well. And lastly here, the central nervous system. It all comes back to the brain and spinal cord. And this is very, very important for us because this is where the application-based practice comes into play. So just a quick note, we have two different sides of the central nervous system down one of the bifurcation paths. We have a sympathetic side and we have a parasympathetic side. That sympathetic side is that fight or flight. All systems go, full alert, blood is reallocated to external extremities, pupils are dilated, respiration increases, heart rate increases, we're ready to fight or flight. Whereas the other side of the story is that parasympathetic side of the nervous system, which is that rest and digest, that general recharge. So the nice thing about taking a deep, purposeful inhale is we see the stimulation of our parasympathetic mode activity increase. So this helps reset our central nervous system, which promotes that cognitive clarity and focus, which also helps to promote a sense of calmness and centeredness, which ultimately, going back to our definition of mindfulness, facilitates present moment awareness. And in the long run, to bring this back to performance, helps to cultivate that balance that we talked about, which is required for ideal performance state. So let's go ahead and put this all together. We're going to practice another sit, and this time it's going to be for 3 minutes. I will ask those of you who have your video on to shut video down and keep your microphone muted. And I'm going to guide you all through a formal practice here. As always, just taking a moment to settle into the space that you're occupying, get nice and comfortable. And as you're beginning to settle in, what I want you to do, if you can, depending on where you're sitting, is make sure that your shoulders are stacked directly over your hips, and your hips are directly over your knees, and your knees are directly over your ankles. So you're in a nice biomechanically neutral position in your chair. Feet are nice and flat on the floor. If you have trouble reaching the floor, just go ahead and shift forward and allow your feet to come down in front of you. Now, while you're in this upright position, you want to be stabilized, but you don't want to be uncomfortable. You don't want to be so tall and so tight that you can't breathe optimally. You want to have a nice relaxation state, but still be in a position where you feel like you have some dignity to yourself. And like we mentioned before, you can allow your eyes to close or just bring your gaze softly on the floor in front of you, whichever is more comfortable for you. Just try to capture a good sense of the environment that you're currently in. What does that environment feel like physically? What types of sounds are you hearing? Perhaps smells or tastes? Or if your eyes are open, what are you seeing? What are you looking at? Simply observing without judgment, without reaction, noticing what your environment is like. And in doing so, try to draw your awareness closer into your own personal space, especially that of the body. And notice how the body feels physically. Notice where your mind is, your brain in action. See if you can detect your heartbeat or your pulse. And in doing so, drawing that awareness closer down into your respiration cycles. Paying close attention to the inhalation and exhalation without changing anything, simply noticing where your breath is at this moment. Let's go ahead and take a nice slow inhale through our nose, expand our diaphragm, pausing at the top. And as we exhale, just bring our awareness down into our feet. Maybe wiggle our toes, stretch out our arches, roll our ankles. Just let our feet settle into the floor in front of us. Again, another easy inhale through the nose, expand the diaphragm, fill up the lung, pause at the top. And as you exhale, just scanning through that lower extremity portion of your body, into your knees, through the upper extremity portions of the legs, into your hips and low back, and try to settle into that chair a little bit further while still maintaining that upright posture. Again, slowly inhaling through the nose and pause at the top. And as you exhale, just scan your awareness through your trunk, releasing any tension in your low back, your abdomen, the muscles of your chest, your upper back, and allow your shoulders to just fall softly away from your ears, relaxing any remaining tension in the body itself. Once again, another slow inhale through the nose, pause at the top. And as we exhale, try to take note of all the muscles in the neck, through that cervical spinal area, releasing any tension or discomfort, allowing your jaw to soften. Relax your tongue if you can, the muscles of your cheeks, around your eyes and your forehead. Just allow your affect to soften and release. And let's take one more controlled, deep, purposeful inhale here through the nose. Pausing at the top. And on the exhale, try to imagine this wave of relaxation flowing from the crown of your head, through your body, and out into the soles of your feet. And pay attention closely to how easily that next inhale comes. Very effortlessly, very efficiently. And as we sit for the next few minutes, if you become distracted at all by a wandering thought or an idea, something on your to-do list, a sound or a sight in your environment, take note of it, observe it, and let it pass. And simply bring your attention and your awareness back to your breath, utilizing that as your anchor as we rest here. If your mind has wandered at all, just gently bring it back to your breathing. So allow your awareness to soften and widen back into this space you're occupying, welcoming some movement back into your body by wiggling your toes and your fingers, rolling out your ankles and your wrists, just slowly allowing yourself to come back into our space. Thank you all so much for your attendance today. Again, Miriam and Athlete Soul, I do appreciate you guys hosting the webinar. I want to open it up for some questions and comments from the audience. We do have some time to hopefully answer questions, if not just create some dialogue. So feel free to come off the mic and video if you would like. I'm going to end my screen sharing so I'm actually able to see everyone, because right now I only see about 4 or 5 of you guys. So just give me 1 second. Okay, perfect.
Can you see everyone now?
Yes, I can, Miriam. Thank you.
Thank you for this 45 minutes. It was fantastic.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Any question and sharing from anybody? Andrea?
I have one, yeah. Hello, my name is Andrea. Hi, Daniela, Miriam. I'm wondering, I've been doing these practices when I was an athlete a lot, and now I'm a coach, and I don't know, I would like to implement these techniques as a team. I'm not sure about how much compulsory I have to put the people in these techniques on. I imagine myself, I would like to do it, at the beginning of practice, all together, sitting, but I know there's a lot of reactions. Sometimes if it's not me who wants to do it, it's my coach who tells me to do it. How much do you think it's positive to do mindfulness if it doesn't come from you?
Yeah, that's a very great question. I'll give you a bit of personal experience, and hopefully that'll relate to what you're asking. First and foremost, I'm a firm believer in you have to practice what you're trying to advocate. And so with that, as you mentioned at the outset of your question, you were practicing as an athlete for quite a while and transitioning into coaching roles. I would just say don't lose sight of that. I would say continue to practice that daily in your own life, and slowly it'll transition into your athletes. Now, with that being said, it is very difficult to start to incorporate something with a group of athletes that have never done something before. I have a lot of experience with that. And so one thing to highlight there is the fact that within a 24-hour window, give or take 23, 22, maybe even 20 hours of that window, the athlete is training or performing at some level. It's the other 20-something hours that really they have to themselves to be training in. So one thing I would suggest for you, instead of starting by incorporating this before practice or after practice, before a game or after a game, try to educate the athletes, try to educate the team as a whole and the coaching staff and the administration, which is a tall order, but I think you can do it. Meaning, if you're able to educate them on the benefits of these practices and they're utilizing it in their everyday life consistently, when it comes to training and competition, it's effortless, it's smooth. It's just like taking the time to practice any other skill. So hopefully that answers your question. Thumbs up, perfect. Thank you. That was an awesome question. I appreciate that.
Or do you think that there are moments that are not linked to practice that can be used to talk about this and bring it on the table, so it's not seen as forcing it onto someone? Like if the team is having a lunch together, or like trying to be calmer about those moments and taking the time to like appreciate and be in that moment, to try to like start including it into the day of an athlete without forcing them to practice.
Yeah, not like let's sit all together. Maybe just okay. The values, no, of mindfulness. Are we aware that we are living this together? No, like this kind of first steps. You mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the way I'll answer that one is a recent discussion I had with the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, and they were asking me what my thoughts were on sports psychology. And while I am a huge believer in sports psychology, it's part of my master's studies, I think anytime you mention that word psychology to a group of athletes, there's this preconceived notion that comes up of leave me alone, there's nothing wrong with me. Even though we're talking about performance-based psychology or positive psychology, for some reason that word still carries that negative connotation, especially in the athletic domain. So one of the things that I suggested to the group of coaching staff and administrators was simply reframing and changing some of these titles that we give to these professionals. Instead of calling them sports psychologists or blank blank, try to look at the positive end of performance optimization and using words that relate directly to the athlete. That way, they take it a little bit easier and the digestion occurs a little bit more optimal, if you will, to bring back in optimization. So, Miriam, to answer your question about these daily practices, I think it all starts from the top down, meaning from the staff all the way through to the last athlete, but also from the last athlete all the way back up to the highest person in the front office. And as a team, if the individuals are practicing it individually in their own personal spaces, when you then come together as a unit, it's much easier and everyone's on the same exact page. But that does take a lot of time and a lot of discipline.
I have a question.
Yes,
I
Daniela.
have been practicing mindfulness with my team. I coach club. I coach synchronized swimming too, artistic swimming. And I usually focus my intention in my teenagers, which have a lot of anxiety, a lot of pressure with school, blah, blah, blah. We tend to write things down, so that's the way I try to bring them together into that mindset, right? And they have been very good at it. But then when I see younger generations, what will be the limit of what is the limit of age, I guess, for this kind of introduction for them? Because younger ones love, like, for example, meditation. But then when is the limit of age to introduce this, okay, pay attention to what you're thinking? Because I think that can be, I don't know, it's a little touchy for the younger, like, let's say 10 and 12.
Yes, I completely agree. And that is a very, very important point. Paying attention to your thoughts is very abstract in nature, right? Metacognition, aware that we're being aware, in some respects takes an advanced understanding of your own personal space, the way you operate as a human being in general. So sometimes when you're working with adolescents or even youth, or down to the nursery level, which I had some experience this last January in Ecuador with, it can be a challenge. But I still think that, to answer your question in short, there is no age restriction. I think the earlier you start, the better. And with that, you obviously wouldn't have them sit there for 3 minutes like we did earlier because they're antsy, they're wiggle worms. They want to get up, they want to move, they want to do something. So being cognizant of the fact that movement is very important to children. It's important to adults as well, but that's another conversation. You can incorporate these meditated and mindfulness-based application practices within movement domains. So things like synchronized movement. You're in synchronized and artistic swimming. You're being very mindful. So simply taking them on dry land and having them do similar movements by focusing only on their breath, that is their anchor. You are by definition incorporating mindfulness with these youth. So you don't necessarily need to get into the idea of 80,000 thoughts a day and the neurophysiology of the frontal lobe. That's not really necessary at that level. I wanted to showcase that information for you all to have an understanding of where this is derived from. But working with the youth, the earlier the better, I think is super, super important. Thank you. Great question. I appreciate it.
I'd like to chime in on that just for 1 second. I own and operate a school in Orange County, and it's middle school teenage kids, and our age range is about 13 to, I think we have one 16-year-old, and we introduced just Headspace, just kept it very simple. I know for me about 4 or 5 years ago, that's how I kind of started my mindfulness journey. You know, at the start it was hard. The kids obviously get squirrely, but they, at the end of the year, I mean, really by the middle of the year, if we missed a day of meditation, they were on our case about it. And so, you know, we didn't know exactly what to expect, but we got some really impressive results. And I think for us, it just came down to the simple things. We didn't try to get too deep into the explanations. We just kept it simple, wanted them to, you know, become one with the present and become one with their breath. And that was kind of our approach. And the kids really love it, and now we kind of have a foundation to build off of that. I just want to chime in with that.
Matt, thank you for doing that. I really appreciate it. And to highlight simplicity is very important, especially with the children. And as Matt mentioned, just having them simply focus on their breathing during dry land, that'll ideally translate to some of their training within the pool itself. So I would encourage you, both Daniela and Andrea, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, to incorporate these practices within your training regimens as coaches. It can be very valuable.
I have a super silly question. That because we went with a team to the Colorado Springs, the High Performance Center, and they offered us a psychological session for psychology session, and it was mindfulness. But how important is the posture of the body when you practice? Because I was taught that like you said, no, little like the posture is kind of important. But in that case, I didn't want to step in because I was not the teacher, no, or the person who was driving the session, guiding the session. So they were all of my athletes like completely on the floor like this, or almost sleeping, no? And the guide didn't step in on that. How much is important if I finally practice with them to take care of the posture?
May I ask what age group your athletes are?
17 and above. 17 to 23.
Yeah, 17 to 23, I would say posture is important. For numerous reasons. First and foremost, I think it promotes confidence, right? When an athlete is standing or seated or even laying in a certain position, they're exuding confidence, which we know in sports psychology, confidence is key to be able to perform at our highest level. Not only with confidence from a psychological domain, but the physiology and the anatomical positioning of our lungs and of our diaphragm. If we're slouching in our chairs or we're curled up on a ball on the ground, by definition, we are unable to get a full, deep, optimal breath. So you're really doing yourself a disservice by not sitting properly. Now, sitting properly, that's kind of a can of worms. Every single person on this call has different anthropometric data, height, weight, limb segmentation, etc. So sitting properly, what I mean by that is taking the time to learn that for yourself. So as a coach, it's again a tall order to teach that and to educate that, but you can be the model. You can sit in a certain position that exudes confidence, and you have dignity to yourself, and you're able to breathe optimally. But one thing I want to suggest for you, because you have an athlete or a group of athletes in that age domain, is a really good way to teach them optimal breathing is just to simply interlace their hands like this and place it. I know you can't see very well, but place it on their belly and have them look down at their hands, and their hands should move outwards away from their belly if they're taking a proper deep breath. More often than not, when you ask someone to take a deep inhale, what you see is this. The inhale occurs in the shoulders, and we know that our lungs aren't housed in our deltoids. They're down in our chest cavity. So being able to relax our diaphragmatic membrane and allow that flow to occur, that's where we start to see that centeredness, calmness, and that positive response in the central nervous system. So going back to your original question, posture is key, but it's also customizable to the athlete. I've worked with athletes from 6'8" to 4'8". So just that change there is very different, not only from a breathing standpoint, but strength and conditioning, from traveling, from dietary needs. So these individual-based training protocols are very important, but they take a lot of time and a lot of patience to be able to incorporate them.
Any other question from anybody?
I have one more. Sorry.
Great, no problem.
But if go ahead if somebody else has another one. No, I go. Okay. I just have little kids, okay, and like 3 and 5 years old. And I was just looking on the iPad to see, because now in quarantine you look for other things, and there was like just learning to code. I know it's not needed now, but I was just curious on how they teach to code 3-year-old, no? And they are doing it with like, it's like a game, no? They are not teaching you why you have to code or why everything. Is just a game that introduces you to this kind of thinking of how to be more logical. And I was actually liking it, the mode of teaching it as a game. Do you think there is a way to teach mindfulness as a game for kids?
Yes, definitely, Andrea. I think we should have a call and we can talk specifically about some ideas, because I don't want to take too long in getting into some of those techniques, but please connect with me and we can chat. I'd love to work with you on that.
Okay.
Great question. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay.
I have one more.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Any book recommendation?
Oh gosh, that's always a tough question to answer.
Top 2, maybe?
So as of late, I read Mindfulness in Plain English, and while it was informative, it was a little, for lack of better terms, all over the place. And so if you don't have a general understanding of the field, it may be a little bit challenging for you. But with that being said, please reach out to me, and I'm just going to send you a list of some that I think would be of value for you as a coach. And you can connect my email through Miriam, or you can hang on till later and I can give it to you.
Okay.
It's totally fine.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect, because I was going to segue into that. First of all, to thank you, Ford, for your time this morning and sharing everything. We didn't really give a little bit of background on what you do.
Yeah.
I know I had promoted that, and there's some people that I know, but you're a team handball player. You're an assistant professor at Auburn. You specialize in mindfulness and performance. Do you want to share a little bit more and tell us where we can find you or how to contact you?
Yes, definitely. You can find me either on Auburn's platform. So if you Google for Dyke Mindfulness, you'll see the first hit will be our website, our Mindfulness-Based Performance and Health Optimization website. Or you can shoot me an email at mindfulness@auburn.edu, or you can send me an email to my consulting platform, which is DRD, as in Dr. D, .consulting, as in consulting, INT, as in short for international. That's drd.consulting.int@gmail.com.
And I'll be sharing your information and the link to the website to everybody with an email with the recording of the event today, so you guys can have that. And we've had, you girls had some questions on breathing and wanted to follow up because we are going to have a specific webinar in July regarding breathing technique for performance as well as for stress management. So we'll have an expert and we'll talk about this for a full hour. So I invite you to check in for that. And since we have Ned on the call too, I wanted to make a little introduction because Ned is going to be doing a webinar for us next week on growth mindset and character development. And so I don't know if there's anything you want to jump in real quick, Ned, or we'll see you next week for your webinar.
Please attend that webinar. Definitely attend that webinar. Ned is an amazing person. You guys should totally attend that one.
Thank you for that. And the focus is going to be on the seasons of growth. We tend to talk about the growth mindset as kind of a trite kind of word now, but we're going to get into the seasons of growth. Starts with the winter, a spring, a summer, and a fall. You can't always harvest. And it seems like we're always trying to harvest, but you can't harvest in the winter. And you can't harvest in the spring when you're planting. If you harvest too early in the summer, you're not going to get the full benefit. And so that's going to be the focus, and a little bit about character strengths and how you can use your top strengths to get to where you want to be. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too, us too. Thank you, Ford, so much for today. Ned, looking forward to yours next week. And then there's going to be a lot more on topics of mindfulness, mental health, mental wellness. So check in for our events, athletesoul.space/events. I will be sharing more information by email, and hope you guys stay safe and well, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you, Miriam. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.